Imagine being a victim of a crime. Some of you might not even have to imagine it. And then being told the person who harmed you is in prison. And then finding out that they have been let out by mistake. Not released by a judge, not released because their sentence has ended, and not released because the parole board has assessed them to be safe. They were just let out. Paperwork processed, property handed back, and someone who should still be in custody walks out into the public. And before anyone says, how hard is it to check a release date? That sentence is exactly why the public are misled about the scandal, because prison release is not just one date on one screen. In the year to March 2025, 262 prisoners were released in error in England and Wales. That was the highest figure on record, more than double the year before. So the question isn't just, how did one person get out? The question is, how broken does the system have to be before the wrong people are being released by mistake? And if you don't know me and you don't know what I'm talking about, hi, my name is Dagna and I was a prison officer in the UK for just short of 6 years. I've stood on the inside of the system and I've stood on the landings and I've seen what the headlines miss. And this is Inside Out Justice, where we say the quiet parts out loud. So if you want any more information and full breakdowns from inside out about the prison system, stay, comment and subscribe. And now, before we get into it, comment below. Do you think accidental releases are mostly sort of human error? Or are they just a proof that the prison system is too broken to safely manage release decisions anymore? Now, I want to make this clear once, because this is where people get a bit confused. An accidental release is not the same as escape. An escape is someone getting out unlawfully through their own actions. An accidental release is where the system itself authorizes the wrong thing. So the person might not have climbed a fence, run from an escort, or smuggled himself underneath a van, but the result can still be the same for the public. Someone is outside when they should not be. And that is why those cases are so damaging, because with an escape, alarms go off. People know immediately that something has gone wrong. But with accidental release, everything can look normal. The paperwork seems fine, the discharge might look normal, and the person might walk through the gate like any other lawful release. And the scariest part is that sometimes the system doesn't even realise fast enough. And this is when an admin mistake becomes a public safety failure. But now let's deal with the numbers properly. In 2024 to 2025, there were 262 releases in error. The year before, it was 115. So that's not a tiny increase, it's pretty much more than doubled. And yes, compared with the total number of correct releases, it's still a very small percentage, and ministers will always say that. But victims don't live inside percentages. They live inside consequences. So if the person who harmed you is released by mistake, you don't care what the overall percentage is small. You care that the system failed in your particular case. And that is why all those stories matter, each and every one of them, because they are not just prison admin mistakes. They are public safety failures, wearing the mask of paperwork. And the first case is one that should have triggered alarms across the whole justice systems, because this wasn't just someone released early. This was someone who should have been moved into immigration detention, but instead, he just walked out. So the first case is Hadush Kabatu. He had been convicted of sexual offences involving a woman and a 14-year-old girl in Epping. He was sentenced to 12 months in prison and was due to be deported. But instead of being transferred into immigration detention, he was mistakenly released from HMP Chelmsford. That triggered a manhunt, and it caused a massive public anger, and absolutely rightly so. Because for victims and families, that is not just an admin issue, it's fear, it's trauma. It's being told that the system has control, and then watching the system lose that control. And this is where the public asks the obvious questions. Who checked his release? Who checked his immigration status? Who checked the deportation position? Who signed it off? And who physically allowed him through the gate? And why was there not a final fail-safe that stopped it? Kabatu's release was later examined by an independent review led by Dame Lynn Owens. The government response to the review found wider issues, including complex processes, poor communication between departments, and outdated technology. And that matters quite a lot, because if it was just one person making a mistake in one prison, you discipline that person, you retrain them and move on. But if the wider system depends on information being copied and transferred in between agencies, interpreted, checked, then one bad link can create a manhunt. And that's not a glitch, that's a warning light. And if you think that case was bad, the next one exposes something even more uncomfortable, because sometimes the system doesn't just make the mistake, it gives the mistake a head start. So the next case is Brahim Kadur Sharif. He was mistakenly released from HMP Wandsworth in October 2025. He was serving a sentence for trespass with intent to steal. But that was not the whole risk picture. He also had previous convictions for indecent exposure and was on the sex offenders register. And police was reportedly not told until days later. Let that sink in. Days. So this wasn't only a mistaken release, it was a mistaken release where the system did not appear to even react fast enough. And that delay is crucial, because every hour someone is unlawfully at large, the risk changes. They can travel, they can disappear, they can contact people, they can reoffend, and they can become harder to locate. And then police are left trying to catch up with a mistake that should have never happened in the first place. So this case actually exposes the bit that headlines pretty much miss, because it's not always about the offence someone is currently serving. The person might be in prison for one offence, like a trespass, but have previous convictions, licence issues, deportation action, safeguarding concerns, restraining orders in place, warrants, aliases and risk markers sitting behind their case. So when the wrong release happens, the question shouldn't just be, what are they in for today? The question should be, who are they? What is the history? Who is at risk? And what was supposed to happen next? Because if the prison has one version, the court has another version, immigration has their own version, and probation has another one, the person at the gate might be making a decision from incomplete information. And that is quite frankly terrifying. But the next case is different, because this one looks less dangerous on paper, and that is exactly why it matters so much. So the third case is Billy Smith, also linked to HMP Wandsworth. He had been sentenced to 45 months for multiple fraud offences. He was released by mistake after a clerical error meant the prison was told the sentence was essentially suspended. The court corrected that mistake, but the prison was not informed. And he later handed himself in, so fair enough. But some people will hear fraud and think, well, that's not as frightening as a sex offender being released. And in terms of immediate danger and physical risk, yes, that is true. But this case sort of exposes one of the most dangerous weaknesses in the whole system, which is bad data. Man is sentenced to prison. The prison receives the wrong outcome. The correction doesn't reach that right people. And suddenly someone who should be in custody is outside. Once it was a fraud prisoner, tomorrow it might be a sex offender or a murderer. And that is the danger, because the prison can't believe it's following the processes whilst the process itself is carrying the wrong information. And this is when people need to stop imagining accidental release as someone just forgetting to lock the door. That is not the real problem. The real problem is when the paperwork opens the door for them. Now, this is where ministers and departments often hide behind percentages. So let's deal with that properly, shall we? Yes, most releases happen properly and correctly. Every day, people leave custody lawfully. The release date is calculated, the license is prepared, probation is notified, property is handed back to them, the gate opens, and that person leaves because the law says they can. And that is normal. That is how it should work. But the fact most releases are correct doesn't mean that the wrong was unacceptable, because one mistaken release can cause a national manhunt. One mistaken release can re-traumatize the victim. One mistaken release can put a witness, a child, a woman, and a whole community back in fear. One mistaken release can pull police resources into finding someone who should have still been in custody. And one mistaken release can destroy public's trust in every promise the justice system has ever made. So no, this isn't about pretending every release is chaos, because they aren't. It's about asking why the number of mistakes more than doubled within a year. and whether the system is still safe enough to manage release decisions under pressure, because the number is bad, but the direction of travel is even worse. So how does that happen? Because no, it's not just someone forgetting to keep a prisoner in. There are 4 main pressure points. First, sentence calculation is too complicated. People outside prison often think sentence is very straightforward. 4 years means 4 years. 12 months means 12 months. But anyone who actually understands custody knows it's really not that simple. Then, on top of all of that, you've got emergency release schemes added because the prison estate is at full. So when the law changes or release scheme changes or the eligibility rules change, OMU and sentence calculation staff have to apply it to live cases, not theory, real prisoners. They're real victims and real release dates. And the margin for error gets smaller. Second, communication between agencies can fail. The court has to send the correct outcome. The prison has to then receive it. The warrants have to be accurate. And corrections have to reach the right person quickly. Immigration decisions have to be clear. Probation information needs to be available. And police risk information might matter too. So if any part of that chain breaks, the release decision can build on the completely wrong foundation. Third, technology is outdated. The government has talked about digital tools, better data extractions, data linking to stop people hiding behind aliases, and modernizing systems. But the fact that those fixes are needed just tells you what the problem is. A modern justice system should not be relying on fragile processes where a missed email, a wrong court result, or clunky systems can lead to someone being wrongly released. And fourth, the whole prison system is under extreme pressure. Overcrowding, understaffing, inexperienced staff, high workloads, emergency release schemes, constant changes. Mind, none of that excuses a mistaken release, but it kind of explains why mistakes become more likely. This is the bit nobody wants to say plainly. Release should never be a tiny margin process. It should be one of the most protected, checked, and supported processes in the whole prison. Because at the gate, the system is making a final decision. Does this particular person have the legal right to walk out today? And the answer has to be right. Not probably right. Not hopefully right. It has to be right. Now, we get to the part where government says it has a plan. And after these cases, there was an independent review led by Dame Lynn Owens, as I've mentioned, and they've accepted recommendations in principle. These recommendations cover data, digital systems, governance processes, policy, training, and culture. There has also been some kind of talk of AI-powered tools, better data extraction, data linking to identify aliases, and Justice Performance Board, and a new warrant queries unit so prisons can escalate concerns coming from court paperwork. And on paper, that could actually sound even sensible. But here's my question. Will it actually reach the people doing the work? Will it reach OMU in every prison? Will it reach sentence calculation staff? Will it reach the governor who's signing the release? Because a digital tool is only useful if the system around it is properly staffed, properly trained, and properly checked. AI will not fix a prison that's already drowning. A new policy will not help if staff are overwhelmed, it's straight away too thin. A new unit will not help if people are too rushed, too undertrained, and too scared to escalate concerns. And this is where government announcements often sound very, very clean from the outside. But inside prisons, the question is always very, very practical. Who's doing the check? What information do they have? How much time do they have? Do they understand the sentence? Do they know what to do if something looks a bit off? And will management back them if they stop a release to question it? Because let me tell you, management support is very scarce. Because if the answer to any of those is weak, the risk stays. The risk does not stay inside the paperwork. The risk walks out of the gate. That is why blaming one officer or one OSG at the gate is too easy. Yes, people should be held accountable, but accountability has to look at the whole chain. Because if you only blame the final person who touched the paperwork, you miss every warning sign that came beforehand. And then nothing really changes. So when you hear Prisoner release. So when you hear prisoner released by mistake, do not picture a funny admin blip. Picture a victim being told the person who harmed them was let out by mistake. Picture police searching for someone who should have never left custody. Picture a court correction not reaching the prison. Picture immigration, probation, and prison records not lining up. Picture a system that's so stretched out that the wrong person can walk out while the paperwork is looking legitimate. That is why this matters, because public protection is not just about locking people up. It's about knowing exactly who should be locked up, who should be released, when, why, and under what conditions. And right now, the accidental release scandal shows that the system has not always been able to answer that safely. So here's my question. Do you think the answer is sort of better technology, more staff, simpler sentencing laws, or maybe all three of those? Because personally, I don't think that one headline policy will fix it all. You need clearer sentencing rules. You need trained sentence calculation staff. You need courts and prisons communicating in real time. You need immigration and probation information visible at the right point. You need proper victim communication and safeguarding when something goes wrong. And you need enough prison places so the system is not constantly using emergency measures just to survive. Lines will tell you that someone walked out. But the real question is, how did the door get open in the first place? So comment below, what shocked you more? The number of accidental releases or actually the types of cases that it involved? Share this episode because people, I think, need to understand what accidental releases actually expose, because sometimes accidental releases are way more dangerous than actual prison escapes.